If you want more confidence, less anxiety, and more headspace in your life, stay tuned.
Welcome to the Sanity Project podcast, where you can awaken your mind to clarity and success even in today's life challenges. We're here to provide insights and solutions that will help you live a sane, healthy, and prosperous life. Here's your host, Joanne Victoria.
Hi, everybody. This is Joanne Victoria, and I am the host of the Sanity Project podcast. If you are here to discover a life of clarity, confidence, and success, you've come to the right place. Our guest today is Carla Royal. And Carla grew up in a family of anxious people, and how many of us haven't been through that? And she knows what she's talking about when she talks about breaking through patterns of anxiety and becoming a psychotherapist to become a master coach and help the rest of us, including you and me, deal with our inner anxiety and pain. What Carla is going to talk about today is how to quiet the mind. And I need that today. And I think a lot of you out there who are listening need that as well. So with this understanding, please accept Carla Royal to the show. Welcome, Carla Royal. Royal.
It's Royal. It's so funny how many people say Royale, but thank you, Joanne, for having me on your show today. I really appreciate it.
Well, I am grateful that you are here, and also the fact that you are speaking and living on a topic that is really important to not only myself, because I like to have guests that talk about things that I have dealt with or am dealing with, because it puts me on the spot to ask the questions, ask the right questions. And I think that if you can help people who are listening stop their overactive imagination, because I think that's a big issue with people who are anxious, is that what if their life to death? So give us some understanding of how you, besides your parents and your family's issue, was this your entire family or just your parents and brothers and sisters, if you had any?
Yeah, it was mostly, I was thinking mostly of my main part of my family, my parents, my brother, my sister, and I. And anxiety was just a part of our lives, but you didn't necessarily see it. We looked good, we played the part, we were professional, we were successful and all this stuff, but we were harboring this hidden anxiety. And it took me decades to kind of get that under control and find my way through that. And I did that through my own therapy and hiring my own coaches, and also in my work as a therapist and coach. So it's been a real journey for me to come to a place of just more peace and flow and clarity.
Well, what do you use as a coping mechanism? I mean, when things right now are pretty terrible for a lot of people, but you represent all these people right now. You are representative. So what coping mechanisms do you use when anxiety tries to knock on your door?
I believe that change happens more through understanding than through techniques and coping mechanisms and those kinds of things. I think until you have a certain understanding or an insight, techniques and tools are just not very effective. It's why people get so gung-ho about wanting to make changes. They make some changes, but then those changes don't stay with them because they don't have a deeper understanding. They don't have a deeper meaning kind of undergirding them and supporting them. And one of the ways I can describe this is to tell you a little story about a friend of mine who was a long-term, multiple decade smoker. And he desperately wanted to stop. He knew it was bad for him. He knew it was probably killing him. He didn't like the habit. It was a dirty habit. And he tried every tool and technique in the book. And he couldn't get relief. He couldn't stop. Every time he would stop, he would start back within a few days. And then one day, he went to the doctor. And the doctor did a lung x-ray. And when the doctor brought that lung x-ray to him, and he actually saw the black overtaking his lungs. In that moment, Joanne, he woke up. he had an epiphany. All of a sudden, the theory of this isn't good for me, all of a sudden it was very, very personal. And he left that office and he never smoked again. And that's because he got a deep understanding. So the first thing, does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense to me. And I wish I could say that I did that. I stopped smoking for the same reason, because years ago when I was smoking, it wasn't that long in my life, but it was there. And I could watch TV shows about people with bad lungs, and that didn't bother me. I'd light up, and I must be a little callow, because the only reason I stopped smoking, and once I did, it was done. I stopped smoking immediately, is they raised the price of cigarettes in the machine. And I know it was that I was going to have to pay more than $1. Mm-hmm. This was a long time ago. And it was like, I'm not doing that. Mm-hmm. And, thank God I didn't have the black lungs like your friend did. Mm-hmm. But
something woke you up in that moment.
Yes. It was like, where am I putting my resources? Where am I placing all of my efforts? Mm-hmm. It was someplace that wasn't beneficial to me. That's the bottom line, even though I would say that it's because the prices went up. That was my stop.
Yeah. And I propose that in that moment you had an insight, and that for whatever reason, that dollar increase or over $1 took you into a deeper understanding of your values and what was important to you, and you were able to stop. And that's what happened with my friend. And so the first thing I do with my clients is help them understand how insight works, and help them look for the deeper meaning, the deeper purpose, so that change is possible. And how that relates to anxiety or to stress is that, you have to wake up to your stories that you're telling. I believe that, neuroscience shows that we don't experience the world out there. We experience our perception of the world out there. One of the ways I talk to my clients about this is when I talk about perception is your stories or your narrative, right? We all have that when we are going through our lives and something happens. It's not necessarily what is happening out there that causes our stress or anxiety. It's actually more what we think about what happens out there. And that's why one day I can be driving along and somebody pulls in front of me and I get really agitated and irritated because I'm thinking a certain way. And another day, when my mind is more clear and I'm more calm and I just don't have a story about that person, it doesn't bother me when they pull out in front of me.
That's amazing.
So the first thing I help my clients come to is to how to wake up to their own narratives, how to wake up to their own stories.
Yeah, I know that there are times when people have their own story and identify and glue it to what their thoughts are in the moment, as you're talking about, when you're driving at one time, you're reactive. When you're driving at another time, you're non-reactive in a negative way. And getting people to accept that and be responsible is very difficult. I just, when people do that, it depends on who I'm speaking with. But, if I'm speaking with my kids, I will just back off because I'm over that. But I know it has nothing to do with me, and
right.
It's time they just took over. But when I'm looking at somebody like a client, I'm going to be a little more profound with them, because it's like, it's a lie they continue to tell themselves.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you're right. It can, I think we live in a culture that has taught us all of our lives. I think we come by this innocently, this problem that you have identified. We live in a culture that tells us that what's out there is what's stressing us. And so that the best we can do is just try to manage it or mitigate it. And I think that that's a little bit not true. It's a confused way of thinking. So when I first start working with clients and I help them see where they're telling stories. So the first the first part is to, obviously the clients that I love to work with already have some self-awareness. So I'm not starting from scratch with these people. They come to me because they want help. They want change. They have some self-awareness. They have some self-responsibility. And so when I start showing them how their stories are showing up for them, and then they start experimenting with that on their own, they start seeing it everywhere. It's sort of like when you buy a new car and you drive off the lot and all of a sudden you see that car everywhere and you had never really noticed it anywhere before. Mm-hmm. It's the same with this. Once you start seeing your stories, you start seeing it everywhere.
Yeah, that is amazing. It reminds me, I used to do some big workshops in the past, and there were retreats, and people would, one of the processes or the things, the games that people had to do was take a walk. Mm-hmm. They had a prescribed path to follow, mm-hmm. and when they reached certain spots, I would have them respond on their phone, to record it somehow. Who are you now? Mm. And, I guess the first time it was okay, but the following 5 times it wasn't, because they got so upset with me that I kept asking that question. Mm-hmm. And them not realizing that every time that question was supposed to be answered, they were in a different place in their life and different mm-hmm. place on the path and mm-hmm. so on and so forth. And it was like they didn't want to see that they had no control. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a problem that's relevant today, is people have no control, so they're more than willing to follow somebody else's narrative. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we come to our own personal narratives through how we were raised, our families, beliefs and narratives, our culture's narratives and beliefs, religious narratives and beliefs, and all of that is what kind of we buy into over time and then build our own beliefs. But when we can wake up to our beliefs and see them for what they are, that they're stories, they're a narrative, then and generally, Joanne, they're located, these stories that we have are located in the past or the future and not in the present moment. So for example, I just got off the phone with a client today who he's a very successful entrepreneur, and his health is suffering because he's driven himself so hard, and he's going to have some surgery. Mm-hmm. And he's had some surgery in the past with around this very issue. And today he started telling me how anxious he was feeling because he realized his wife wasn't going to be able to visit him in the hospital, that he was going to wake up alone. And he started telling me all these scenarios about what might happen. And I brought his attention to that. I said, man, you're living in a made-up story about the future. And so what you're doing is you're living some trauma again and again and again and again before the actual surgery. And so what I want you to do is to see that. I want you to see how you're living in your imagination right now. And the brain can't distinguish between reality and what we imagine. It's just the nature of our brain. Mm-hmm. And so whatever we imagine, whatever we think, and we are going to feel, we're going to experience. And the brain doesn't know the difference. And so he was actually putting himself innocently, unknowingly, into a very, very stressful situation that in this moment, when I was on the phone, I said, look, in this moment, you're just fine. You're just fine in this moment. And so I helped him. He went, oh my God, I can see that I'm just making all this stuff up. And I told him, I said, if you get into that situation and it's the worst case scenario, live it once. Don't live it 100 times between now and then and suffer 100 times instead of suffering the one time. And it could be better than you expect. But when you live it over and over and over in your imagination, then you begin to deplete your emotional and psychological resources, so that if you do have to go through the worst part, you're just not quite as prepared for it. You just can't move through it as easily. But if you live it once, all your resources are going to be available to you, and you're going to be able to find your way through more easily.
Yeah, thinking about it and telling the story over and over just embeds it more in the brain, and it becomes a part of you that you don't need.
That's right. That's right. It creates that neural pathway. And what we know about neural pathways is that when we leave a particular neural pathway alone, it grows back like a path in the woods. It grows back over. And one of the ways I think about it with my clients is like your Facebook feed. Mm-hmm. You know, if you click on an article in Facebook is going to give you more of those articles. And all of a sudden, if you click on 3 political articles, let's say, Facebook is going to show you 15 more political articles. If you stop clicking on the political articles, Facebook is going to, over time, stop showing you those articles. And the brain is somewhat similar in that if a thought comes through that's stressful, and I click on it, let's say I entertain it, let's say I feed it, let's say I add thinking upon thinking upon thinking to it, then the brain is going to show me more of that. But if I leave that thought alone, it's not that I have to fight it. It's not that I have to try not to have it. It's just that I basically leave it alone so that it can just move through me, which is what thoughts do.
That's interesting. And that what you're telling me that Facebook's algorithms do is also how hackers can determine what kind of information to post, especially on things like, I mean, Yahoo is the worst because they're just not very bright, and I'm talking about the authors. But when the people respond, these are the people that are hacked. And it's very interesting. They know the psychological ways to get to people. When I find people on my Facebook feed, for example, that are just insistent on their point of view that is just giving me a headache, I just dismiss them for 6 months.
Yeah.
I have to, because I don't want that stuff in my head. The stuff I want in my head is stuff that I'm aligned with in moving forward and helping people get better or more successful, whatever it is. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, what I hear you saying is in essence, you remove your attention from them for 6 months. And that's basically what I'm saying. When we remove our attention from a particular thought, it's free to move through and we don't have to take up residence with that thought. So, but we have habits of thoughts that we have, like there are thoughts that come through my mind, Joanne, that I have no idea where they come from. And they have no impact on me. They just come through and they go. But there are other thoughts that come through, let's say thoughts of shame. Shame has been a huge issue for me in my life. Thoughts of shame, and those are habits of thoughts that became beliefs. Now, those are a little bit more difficult to unravel because I've been clicking on them, if you will, for so long. I've been giving attention to them for so long. And they have created a deep neural pathway. But the brilliance of the brain is that those pathways, as I said earlier, can grow back. But what it requires is that we remove our attention from those. And of course, there are tons of ways to do that. So I love what you just said about how you dismiss them for a few months.
Oh yeah, they're dismissed. It's all I can do. I have no control. I do have control. I could unfriend them. I could do all of that stuff. But maybe I'll change my mind. And if I miss them in 6 months, then I'll go back. And if I don't, I'm just going to eliminate them totally. Because if I had 5 people that are on my list, that's all I would need. I have no attachment to any of that stuff, which I shouldn't be saying as a podcast host, because, how many followers do you have? How many followers do I need to be a guest? Yeah. I swear. And the last time somebody asked me that, one category was like 0 to 1,000. And I said, that's fine. And, it's I can't get entangled in that stuff too much. Too much time has passed. And I think that becomes a problem for most people because there's so much information out there, easily accessible. The information's always been there, but now it's easy to access.
Well, and it really does a number on our brain. I just read a book called The Shallows. I can't remember the name of the author, but he was talking about how all of this access that you just spoke of, all of this information overload access, what's happened is, we've gotten really, really shallow. We don't sit down and read for an hour at a time. We skim an article and move to the next thing. And it's really, he's explaining through that how it's doing a number on our brain.
Oh, yes.
And so, yeah. And I love your wisdom that, you just dismiss these people and you don't spend all that time on that, because it just clutters and clutters and clutters your brain.
Yes. I live in a household where there's different perspectives on politics, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
and we just ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
number one, I don't want to discuss it, even
Mm-hmm.
my point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, I definitely don't want to argue about it because I can't change it.
Mm-hmm.
I can only change myself. So it's not discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And believe me, it's healthier that way, because every
Mm-hmm.
time you get close to the line, it was like, no, I don't have time to put that in my brain.
Yeah. Yeah. And what it sounds like you're talking about to me is where you are making a very conscious decision about where you're going to place your attention.
I do that. I try to do that in most everything. If I'm, I lately have gotten a lot of books from the library to put on my Kindle, because the library is still getting themselves together. And I'll get so many books on Kindle that I think might be good, and then I'll start it and I go, nope, not wasting my life on this, and I'll delete it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
even if I'm watching something they say on Netflix is, look at this outstanding show, number one,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of discretion, and I go and I'm going, I'm going to spend 2 hours watching this.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Mm-hmm.
it's not even a story.
Yeah.
So no, I just eliminate.
Mm-hmm.
I just eliminate. And the more I eliminate, the more time I have for my head.
Yes. Yes. I believe that people basically have two fundamental problems. One is they don't know who they really are at their essence. And two is they have too much on their minds. And so having too much on their minds kind of clouds their ability to access their own innate wisdom, resourcefulness, well-being, and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that the work that I do with my clients is basically just point them back to who they are and help them take things off their mind, help them wake up to their stories and narrative, and also to help them understand that their psychological system is actually self-correcting. And what I mean by that is, when our bodies are self-correcting. When you cut yourself, if we cut ourselves, if we break a bone, what we do is we give it a little tender, loving care. We cover it, we might stitch it, we might put a cast on it, but then we leave it alone. We don't actually heal it. It heals itself. That's the nature of our bodies. And our psychological system is very much the same. When we have a psychological trauma, when we leave it alone, give it a little tender, loving care, a little rest, it does the healing. But what we tend to do in this culture, and old psychology tends to do, is we go in to the psychological trauma and we go into it again and again and again and again and again, and we tell the story of it again and again and again. And in that way, we keep it alive. It is necessary to go in there and look at it and to take care of it, to clean it out so it doesn't get infected, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
But to revisit it again and again and again can actually keep the trauma alive.
Oh, it will keep the trauma alive. There's no two ways about it. No two ways. And then people just wallow.
Yes. Yeah. It's really partly why I left the psychotherapy world, was because I found that, I was just going into this again and again with my clients, and it was so painful, and they weren't getting the help that I felt like they could get. And I took some time off between my therapy practice and my coaching to kind of explore some of these things, and come to find out that our psychological system is self-correcting. It's always seeking equilibrium. If we don't tinker too much in it, just like we don't cut open our stitches to see if the cut is healing, we kind of leave it alone and let it do its thing. Our psychological system will do the same. It will self-correct.
Well, it sounds as if you are a great coach in the area that you've chosen to help people. So for our listeners today, can you give us a strategy that they can put in their lives right now that would help them achieve more mind space, head space?
Yes. I mean, basically, I'll say what I just said. One is the first thing I would say is to remember who you are, or to learn who you are fundamentally. You are star stuff. You are divinity. If you're listening to this, you have a 100% survival rate. I love that. You have a 100% survival rate. You've made it this far. You have a huge capacity and capability to live life. And the flip side of that is life is living you. It's not all up to you. Life is living you. Just like life brings the acorn to a full-grown, towering oak tree. Life is living you. The second thing to remember is that your psychological system is self-correcting. You don't have to tinker too much. If you give it a little loving care, you give it a little rest, it will heal. And the third thing I would say is to wake up to your narrative, wake up to your stories about what's happening out there. Neuroscience shows that we are not experiencing what's out there. We experience our perception of what's out there. When you can wake up to your stories, then it's sort of like finding out how a magic trick works. The gig is up then. And you're much more able to come back to a clear state of mind where you can find your way forward.
Well, there you go, people. Okay, so what I tell the listeners each and every time, at least once, if not more, is to re-listen to this podcast. Have a pen and paper, because I think it goes into your brain better if you write it. It's been known, it's been proven. Don't just put notes on a little Word document and then forget all about it. Write it down, carry it with you. Take notes. And then if you really like what you've heard, listen to it again and decide who you can share this podcast with. How about a family member, a coworker, or a boss, or somebody who might need a little help along the way? I want to thank Carla Royal for being here today. For those of you who want to find out more about her, you can go to her website at carlaroyal.com and read what she has to say. She has a lot of information on her website, and you can find her at LinkedIn, Carla Royal, on Facebook, Carla Royal Coach, and on Instagram, Carla Royal. And I want to thank you for being here today, Carla. And before we go, I must mention my website. It's been rewritten, redone, now niched and focused on helping you find your true calling, and not only find your true calling, but help you make it into a business. And if you already have a business, adding it to your business. So if you want to find out about your true calling, go to askjoannevictoria.com, sign up for my relevant posts, and then you will also receive a copy of the True Self Handbook, a guide to, a guide to, why don't I have it in front of me? A guide to transform your life. Yes, the word transformation. So I have to look at what energy I have in that word transformation today, Joanne. The True Self Handbook, a guide to transform your life. And with what Carla Royal has said here today, you're on your way, people. Take care, Carla, and I'm glad you were here.
Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Sanity Project podcast. Please go to AskJoanneVictoria.com to listen to more podcasts. Check out Joanne's coaching programs and get a free copy of her report, 5 Steps to Achieve Life-Work Harmony. That's AskJoanneVictoria.com. Take care, and thanks for being here.